The crate came in on the last barge of the day, wedged between a pallet of hydraulic fittings and 3 containers of refrigerated hatchery feed. It was marked in the standard way: breeder stamp, origin codes, species class, and then, in red across the top panel, 2 words that meant the manifest manager was supposed to route it straight to the burn floor. Defective. Return. I was working Bay 14 at Thoric Station, the overflow dock, the one they gave to loaders who'd been around long enough to stop asking questions. I had been loading and offloading freighters at this station for 22 years, which meant I'd learned exactly how much authority a manifest manager actually had over what happened in my bay. Not much. I pried the crate open with a flat bar. That's not protocol. Protocol said I was to sign the destruction order, have a handler take it to the furnace, go home, and not think about it. But I'd been opening crates since before most of the station's junior staff were born, and I did not like the sound coming from inside that crate. It was a small sound, not crying, not exactly. More like a creature that had forgotten crying was an option and had gone somewhere quieter than despair. I pried the crate open. She was about the size of a large dog, which meant she was very young. Dragon hatchlings triple in size across their first 6 months, and this one hadn't been alive for more than 8 or 10 weeks by my rough guess. Her scales were the wrong color. That was the first thing I noticed. Not wrong in any way I could articulate, just wrong by whatever standard the breeders used. They were a pale copper brown, the color of old equipment left in sun, with faint bands of darker rust running up her flanks. Her wings were half-fledged, the membrane still translucent along the trailing edge, and her left wing sat at an angle that meant something in the joint wasn't sitting right. She looked up at me. I've unloaded a lot of cargo. Most cargo does not look up at you. All right, I said, and I went to find a heat coil. The furnace order sat on my workbench for 3 days. I didn't sign it. I told Prever, the manifest clerk, that the paperwork had a discrepancy in the origin codes, which it did, actually, though the discrepancy was small and would not have stopped the process if anyone had pushed it. Prever did not push it. Prever was overworked and trusted me, and I had been there longer than the station's current ownership structure. The hatchling lived in a salvaged equipment locker at the back of Bay 14. I rigged a heat coil from a disassembled cargo warmer and laid it under a folded canvas, and she slept on top of that canvas like she'd always known where the warmth was. I fed her from my lunch tin, the processed protein ration that dock workers get, which is not what a dragon hatchling of any pedigree is supposed to eat, but she ate it without complaint. She did not make a lot of noise. This worried me at first. Hatchlings are supposed to be loud. I knew that much from the occasional legitimate dragon cargo we processed, the ones from the big hatching farms destined for temples or noble estates or sanctuary collections. Those hatchlings chirped and shrieked and demanded attention at a volume that could be heard 3 bays over. This one was quiet. She watched me. When I put the food down, she waited until I stepped back before she ate, which was either very well-mannered or a sign that she had learned to be careful around hands. The left wing joint was a partial dislocation. I figured this out on the second day by watching how she held it and cross-referencing a livestock medical text I borrowed from Prever's office without asking. I said it the way the text described, with a brace made from a strip of cargo webbing and a bent piece of framing rod. She held still for the whole procedure. When I finished, she pushed the top of her head very firmly against my wrist. I took that to mean she was tolerating me. On the 3rd day, the breeder sent a follow-up notice. The crate had not been logged as destroyed. Where was the confirmation paperwork? I wrote back that the crate's origin codes remained unresolved, and the station had a policy of holding disputed cargo pending resolution. There was no such policy. I invented it in the moment, and it bought me another 4 days before the breeders escalated. They escalated on a Thursday. I was eating my lunch in Bay 14, sitting on an equipment case with the hatchling beside me on the bench. She had started sitting beside me while I ate, not touching the food, just sitting, when the bay door opened and 3 people walked in. 2 were in the plain grey of the breeder's company. The 3rd was not in any uniform I recognized. He was tall in the way that dragonkin who take humanoid form are sometimes tall, not human tall, but constructed tall, as if height was a decision made with extra care. His skin was the deep amber bronze of old scale plates, and his eyes were the flat, steady gold of a predator that has not needed to hurry in a very long time. He wore a formal sash, deep crimson, and on the sash were markings I could not read. He walked the way people walk when they are accustomed to rooms going silent as they enter. Bay 14 did not go silent. Bay 14 had a compressor running and 2 other loaders arguing about a weight manifest at the far end. But I noticed him. The breeder's representatives stopped near the door. The tall man kept walking, directly toward my bench. The hatchling turned her head and looked at him. Then she stood up, very straight, and held very still. Not afraid. Attentive. The way you stand for an inspection you have been waiting for. The tall man stopped 2 feet from the bench. He looked at the hatchling for a long time, at the brace on her wing, at the canvas on the equipment locker behind her, at the crumbs from my lunch tin scattered near where she'd been sitting. Then he looked at me. "How long?" he said. 3 days, I said. She came in marked for the furnace. Breeders listed her defective. The wing. Partial dislocation. I braced it. The text said 4 to 6 days before it can be reassessed. I paused. I'm a dock loader, not a vet. I did what I had to do with what I had. He looked at the brace again. It was not elegant. Cargo webbing and a bent rod, tight but not pretty. He studied it the way you study something you didn't expect to find done correctly. The coloring, I said, because I'd been wondering about it and I'd run out of reasons not to ask. The breeders called it defective, but I've been looking at her for 3 days, and I can't figure out what's wrong with it. Nothing is wrong with it, the tall man said. It is the 3rd hatched coloring. It presents in approximately 1 hatchling per imperial clutch, across a generation. The breeder's standard scales grade it as substandard because it does not match the primary clutch color. He looked at me steadily. They were not informed of what they were grading. I sat with that for a moment. She's imperial, I said. She is the 3rd hatched of the current emperor's lineage, he said. Her survival transit was unannounced. It is a practice that dates to the consolidation period, when hatchlings of the imperial line were tested for resilience by routing them through common cargo channels without imperial identification. He glanced toward the breeder's representatives near the door, and something in his expression made both of them look at the floor. The hatchlings are not supposed to reach the furnace. There are protocols. The protocols failed. Paperwork discrepancy, I said. You found one. I looked for one. He was quiet for a moment. Most dock workers would not look. Most dock workers, I said, don't open crates they're told not to open. The hatchling made a sound then, low, almost subvocal, the kind of sound she'd been making when I first pried the crate open, but different now. Not the sound of a creature that had forgotten how to ask for things. Something that said it remembered. The tall man reached out and touched the side of her head with the back of 2 fingers, very gently, and she pressed into his hand the same way she'd pressed into my wrist after I'd braced the wing. I am the Emperor's first herald, he said, without looking away from her. I will need your name for the record. Ren Oders, I said. Bay 14, Thoric Station. Dock loader, grade 3. He straightened and looked at me directly. Ren Oders, Bay 14, Thoric Station. He said it the way you say something you intend to remember. The Emperor will receive a full account of the transit failure. He will also receive an account of what happened in this bay during the 3 days of that failure. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. The hatchling had sat back down on the bench. She looked at me once, the same flat, watchful look she'd had since the first moment I opened the crate, and then she looked back at the herald. The brace, the herald said. Did the text specify a follow-up interval? 48 hours for a first reassessment, I said. I was planning to do it tomorrow morning. Then we will be here tomorrow morning. He turned to go, then stopped. The equipment locker. The canvas. The heat coil. Salvage, I said. I'll put it back when she's gone. Leave it, he said. It will be logged as it is. He walked back toward the door. The breeder's representatives moved quickly out of his way, which they should have done when he arrived but had apparently needed the intervening 15 minutes to figure out. The bay door opened and closed. I sat back on my equipment case. The hatchling put her chin on my knee. It was the first time she had done that. It pressed down with more weight than something her size should have had, warmed through my work trousers, and she looked up at me with those flat, steady eyes. All right, I said, the same thing I'd said when I first opened the crate. I picked up my lunch tin and put it back in my bag. The compressor ran. 2 bays over, the argument about the weight manifest continued, neither party aware that anything unusual had happened in Bay 14. I have thought about those 3 days a fair number of times in the years since. I have tried to work out what I would say if someone asked me why I opened the crate, why I didn't just sign the form and go home and not think about it. I don't have a very satisfying answer. I have opened a lot of crates. Some of them make sounds. If a crate makes a sound, you open it. That's the job, or it should be. The Herald did come back the next morning, with 2 others I didn't know and a proper veterinary kit. They reassessed the wing. It was healing. They told me I'd said it correctly, which I appreciated because I had not been certain. Before he left, the Herald gave me something, a small tile, unmarked on one face and marked on the other in the script I still couldn't read. He said it was a notation of record. He said if I ever presented it at any Imperial way station, I would be received. I thanked him. I put it in my bag next to my lunch tin. I went back to work. I still have it. I've never used it. Some things you hold because the holding is the point, not the using. Because once in 22 years of loading other people's cargo, a crate made a sound, and you opened it, and what was inside looked up at you, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The burn floor notice is still on my workbench, unsigned. I never did file it. There was never a discrepancy in the origin codes, strictly speaking, but I looked for one, and I found one. That's the job.